1887. Late summer. Somewhere near the edge of Wayfarer County. The wheat fields had already been stripped bare, and the stalks left behind were sharp enough to cut wind. Dusk wasn't gentle. It came down like a closing door, and the color of the sky was the color of smoke before it finds a flame. Ada Delaney stood tied to a fence post that had seen too many seasons and too little mercy. Her wrists were raw from rope, her dress torn at the hem, and the men who had brought her there were laughing, the way men laugh when they've forgotten what it costs. "You owe Harker," Tate Riker said, lighting a twist of straw. "Debts due in kind." The first spark took, hissing up the dry grass, hungry for something to blame. Ada turned her face away from the heat, but the wind found her. The air was thick with dust and kerosene, and the horizon rippled with red. She whispered at once, "Please, don't let me burn." Like a prayer no one was listening to, but prayers travel strange roads on the prairie. Across the field, a single rider paused on a rise of earth, his silhouette cut against the low sun like a mark carved by fate. His name was Amos Gray, a rancher whose quiet was heavier than words. He watched the fire start to move, saw the men's shadows dance across it, and for a heartbeat, he didn't move at all. Then something in the sound, maybe her voice, maybe memory, broke open the stillness inside him. The wind turned harder, driving the fire toward the post. Ada's eyes stung. She tried to twist her wrists, felt blood slip beneath the rope. Her voice was gone now, eaten by smoke. Riker and his men stepped back to admire their work. "That's that," one of them said. But Riker stayed, holding his match like a trophy, watching the flame crawl faster along the wheat stubble. "She'll go quick," he muttered. "Dry wood always does." Amos rode closer, keeping low behind the cut of the land. The bay horse beneath him breathed hard, sensing the heat ahead. He could smell the fire now, an animal smell, sharp and alive. And then, the memory came without warning. His sister Ruth, her hands beating at a burning barn door that never opened. He'd carried that sound for 10 years, the way some men carry bullets. Tonight, it was louder. He reined in 50 yards from the fence line. The fire was starting to leap, twisting along the wind like a living tongue. Riker's men hadn't seen him yet, too busy laughing, tossing stones at the edge of the blaze. Amos slipped from the saddle, unlooped the coil of rope from his horn, and grabbed the short-handled shovel strapped beside it. He didn't reach for his gun. Guns made noise, and noise made sense of cruelty. He wasn't there for sense. Ada coughed hard, bent forward, lungs clawing for air. She saw movement through the shimmer of heat. Something dark, deliberate, cutting through the glare. At first, she thought it was the fire itself. But then the shape steadied, shoulders broad, hat pulled low. The stranger walked instead of ran, his coat flapping in the wind, the firelight folding over him in waves. One of the men spotted him. "Hey, you got business here?" Amos didn't answer. He kept walking until the glow painted one side of his face. Riker spat into the dirt. "This land's private," he said, thumbing his belt. "We're clearing brush." Amos looked at the burning field, then at the girl bound to the post. "Wrong direction," he said. "What's it to you?" He tilted his head once. "Quiet. You keep burning long enough, and you'll clear your neighbors too." That got a laugh from one of the riders, but it died fast when Amos stepped closer, shovel dragging behind him, its metal edge hissing in the dust. He stopped beside the post, meeting Ada's eyes just once. They were full of heat, fear, and a kind of stubborn life that made the air around them hum. He spoke low, almost to himself. "Hold still." The knife flashed quick, cutting the rope at her wrists. The sound it made, fibers snapping, skin sighing, was the first honest sound of the night. She stumbled forward, nearly falling into him, and he caught her with one arm. The rope slipped to the dirt, like something that had lost its purpose. Behind them, the men stirred. Riker's hand twitched toward his gun. "You don't walk away from this," he said. Amos didn't even look up. "No," he replied softly. "We don't." The wind shifted then, hard and fast, spinning the fire toward all of them. The roar rose, hot and alive, the kind that makes everything else small. Amos grabbed Ada's hand, pressed it flat against his chest. "Breathe slow," he told her. "Don't run. Wind'll eat us both if you run." She nodded once, eyes wet, throat raw. The sky went dark behind the smoke, and the world shrank to the color of copper and ash. Somewhere in the burning field, a horse screamed, and the first fence post cracked apart, a sound like bones splitting. Riker cursed, backing away, eyes wild. Amos looked toward the far end of the blaze, saw the way the fire line curved, realized it was heading straight for the house beyond the ridge. His jaw tightened. "We end it here," he said, more to the fire than to the man. And then the wind turned again. The flame leapt, fierce as judgment, and the night came alive. The fire moved, like a thought that refused to die. Each gust of wind bent it sideways, then let it run again. Orange teeth gnawing through dry grass. Ada stood hunched beside the post she'd been tied to, her arms trembling from the blood rushing back. Amos moved with a steady rhythm. Dig, lift, throw. Each shovelful of dirt cut a shallow trench between the fire and the woman. Sparks landed on his coat and went out, as if they'd been told to behave. Riker's men circled warily now, the laughter gone. They didn't understand a man who didn't shout. "You're wasting time, rancher," one of them barked. "She's done for anyway." Amos didn't look up. "Then we better start early." He widened the line, the shovel's scrape singing against the hardpan. Ada stumbled beside him, coughing. He took off his hat, pressed it into her hands. "Cover your mouth. Breathe through it." The smell of burning oil hung thick, twisting with the dry sweetness of wheat smoke. Over it came Riker's voice, smooth, ugly. You think that trench will stop the prairie? Amos lifted his head at last. Not the trench, he said quietly. Me. He looked toward the horizon. The wind was turning. He could feel it slide across his skin, the way a promise changes direction before it breaks. If it shifted again, the fire would take everything, the post, the field, maybe the house beyond the ridge. He wiped sweat from his eyes, saw the rope still hanging from Ada's wrist. The skin beneath was red and wet. Can you stand? He asked. She nodded, though her knees said otherwise. Then stand with me. Riker stepped closer, boots sinking into ash. You got a death wish, boy? Amos straightened, the shovel resting across his shoulder like a quiet kind of defiance. Had one, he said. Spent it already. The younger, rider, Nate, shifted in his saddle. His face looked wrong under the light, too soft for cruelty. He watched Ada beat at a stray spark with her hat and saw something he didn't have a name for yet. Riker didn't notice. He was watching Amos. You got a minute before this turns bad, he said. That woman ain't worth, Amos cut in. She's a person. The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. Nate flinched like they'd hit him too. The silence that followed was the strange kind. Alive, waiting to choose a side. Then the wind made its decision. It swung hard from the south, dragging a sheet of fire toward them. Riker cursed, backing off, coat flapping. Mount up, he shouted. But the horses balked, terrified of the noise. Sparks scattered through the dusk like angry stars. Amos dropped to his knees again, carving the line wider, deeper. Kick the dirt, he told Ada. Here, keep it black. She obeyed without question, her skirt dark with soot. Together they made a crescent of scorched earth. That might, if the wind kept mercy, save the rest. The shovel handle burned his palms. Sweat traced salt through the dust on his neck. Still, he didn't stop. Why are you helping me? She rasped. He didn't answer right away. The fire had reached the edge of the trench. Testing it. Licking across like a cat tasting water. Because someone once didn't, he said at last. The flame hesitated, then rolled sideways, following the new wind. For a heartbeat, the world went still, except for the hiss of cooling grass. Riker's shadow flickered and fled. He turned his horse and kicked hard, disappearing into the smoke. His men followed, shouting curses no one heard. Only Nate stayed behind, staring at the dark earth under his boots. Amos stood, chest heaving. The night had lost its color. Everything was gray and trembling. Ada leaned against the post that had nearly killed her, her breath shallow, her face streaked black. He stepped closer, handed her his canteen. Sip slow, he said. She drank, coughed, then nodded. Thank you. He tipped his hat once. Don't thank me yet. His eyes moved to the north, the part of the field still burning fast. In that direction, the faint outline of a roof glowed red. The fire's got a new appetite. Ada followed his gaze, saw what he saw. The house on the ridge, old wood dry shingles, already catching light. "That's Harker's place," she whispered. "There's a child up there." Amos tightened his grip on the shovel, jaw set. "Then we've still got work to do." The wind rose again, and the smoke bent low, curling around them like a warning. The fire turned its face toward the ridge, and together they started running. The ridge rose like a sleeping beast ahead of them, all scorched stubble and wind. Amos ran first, shovel slung low, boots thudding through the dry soil. Ada followed close, lungs aching, her skirt snagging on weeds. Every breath tasted of iron and smoke. From below came the sound of the fire chasing them, soft at first, then roaring, like the land itself had found a voice. Halfway up, Amos stopped and scanned the slope. The fire line was already curling toward the north, licking its way toward the wooden house that stood silhouetted against the dying light. "We won't make it if we run straight," he said. "We cut it off here." He jammed the shovel into the dirt and began to dig, his movements sure, practiced. Ada hesitated only a moment before joining him, using her hands, her shoes, anything to tear up the grass. The wind pressed against their backs, hot as breath. Ash fell like gray snow. From somewhere up the hill came a cry. A man's voice, thin with age. Ada's heart stumbled. "That's Mr. Harker," she said. "He can't move fast." Amos didn't look up. "Then we buy him time." The ground was hard, but Amos kept digging, carving a crescent of raw earth. Ada threw dirt into the flames, watching them hiss and twist. Her palms bled where the rope had torn her skin. But she didn't stop. Out of the smoke came Nate, eyes wide and terrified, clutching a wet blanket from his saddlebag. "Tell me what to do," he gasped. Amos glanced at him once. "Start here. Beat down the sparks before they jump." Nate dropped to his knees, slapping the ground, coughing. The wind threw sparks into his hair, but he didn't flinch. Ada saw his hands shaking and realized they weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking from shame. Below, the fire reached the bottom of the hill and took a long breath. It roared upward, bright as a sunrise gone wrong. Amos drove the shovel deep again. "Keep it black!" he shouted. Ada stomped, kicked, smothered every ember she could see. Her body ached, her throat burned. But she felt something threading through the fear. Purpose. Riker's laughter echoed faintly from the distance. He'd circled back on his horse, watching the struggle from far away, his figure barely visible through the smoke. "Let it burn," he hollered. "The prairie takes what it wants." Amos turned, his face streaked with soot. "Not tonight." He grabbed the rope from his belt, tied one end around a half-burned post, and threw the other to Ada. "Pull when I say." She nodded, hands trembling on the line. He wrapped the rope across a patch of brush, soaked it with what little water remained in his canteen, and struck at the earth around it with his shovel. The dirt rose in clouds. "Now!" he yelled. Together they yanked, dragging the smoldering brush down the slope, carving a trench of ash behind it. The fire hit that scar of black and faltered. its fury tripping over the fresh wound of earth. For the first time since the flames began, the wind hesitated. Nate fell backward, gasping. "It's holding," he whispered. "It's really holding." Ada leaned against the rope, chest heaving. "You learned that from somewhere," she said. Amos nodded once. "Long time ago." His voice carried a weight that didn't belong to this moment. "Didn't work then." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft crackle of dying fire. The trench held. The wind shifted again, weaker now, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far off. Amos lifted his head toward the sound of the ridge. "He's still up there," Ada said. Amos nodded. "Then we finish this." Behind them, Nate's horse snorted nervously, hooves striking sparks from the stones. Amos looked at the boy. "You can leave," he said. "No one will chase you." Nate shook his head, rate slow. "I ain't leaving." His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. "Not till it's out." Ada watched him, saw the flicker of something fragile, remorse trying to stand on its own legs. Then the wind groaned again, and they all turned toward the ridge. A faint glow flared behind the Harker house. New fire, small but hungry. Amos gripped the shovel tighter. "Let's go." Ada looked back at the trench, the line of black earth still smoking faintly, and felt a pulse of pride run through the ache in her arms. They had stopped one fire, another waited, and this time she wouldn't wait to be saved. The three of them started up the hill, the world behind them glowing like the inside of a forge. Somewhere above, a child's voice cried out, and the sky opened with the smell of lightning. By the time they reached the ridge, the light had turned the color of copper pennies left too long in rain. The house ahead was small and crooked, its roof already breathing smoke. Amos could feel the wind shifting again, restless and mean. It came from the west now, pushing the fire straight toward the Harker homestead. He didn't waste words. "We start a break behind the shed," he said, "fast as we can." Nate ran to fetch the horse and tie it down, while Ada hurried to the old water trough, finding it half full and black with ash. She dipped her shawl in and wrung it out until it was dripping. The heat from the oncoming blaze hummed against her skin like a fever. "He's inside," she said, her voice tight. Through the small window she could see a flicker of movement. An old man, stumbling, coughing, too stubborn or too confused to run. Amos kicked the door open. "Mr. Harker!" His voice filled the room like thunder. The old man looked up, dazed. "Can't leave the coop," he croaked. "Henhouse'll catch." Amos took him by the arm, gentle but firm. Better a lost coop than a lost town. He led him out into the open air, where Ada waited, face streaked with soot and fear. The heat swelled behind them. Sparks drifted down like angry snow. They laid the old man near the trough. "Stay low," Ada told him, pressing the wet shawl over his mouth. The hens clucked madly from the yard, trapped by the fire curling along the fence line. Harker's cloudy eyes filled with panic. "Them's all I got left," Amos glanced at Ada, then back to the birds. Then let's keep something left. He swung his shovel, breaking the latch, and the frightened hens burst out, flapping into the smoke, vanishing toward open field. Nate stumbled up from the slope, coughing. "The fire jumped the ditch," he shouted. Amos turned. The new wind had pulled it north again, toward the wagon and supplies. "Damn it," he muttered. "This prairie's got a mind tonight." He handed Ada his canteen. "Pour it down the line there. Keep it wet." She obeyed, dragging the water in a thin stream across the dirt. The sound of flame grew louder, nearer. Riker's voice rose again from below, faint but clear, carried by the wind. "Won't change a thing, Gray. The land don't want saving. It wants paying." Amos looked toward the smoke, his face unreadable. "And it's tired of debt collectors." He turned back to Ada. "Stay with Harker. If the wind breaks east, head for the creek bed. Don't look back." She shook her head, eyes sharp. "You're not staying here alone." He met her gaze for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "Then keep digging." Together they carved the dirt bare, widening the circle around the house. The air was thick, each breath like swallowing heat. Nate joined in, his hands blistered, his shirt blackened. None of them spoke. The rhythm of shovels and boots did the talking. Then came the moment every fire brings, the pause before it decides. The wind stilled, heavy as breath held too long. Amos straightened, squinting at the wall of smoke. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the gust hit, fierce and sudden, driving the blaze sideways. The flames that had been racing for the house veered toward the open pasture instead. The fire split itself, roaring into two directions, one dying against the fresh-dug line of earth, the other limping downwind toward emptiness. Ada dropped the shovel, trembling. "It's turning." Her voice broke into relief. Amos exhaled slow, wiping sweat and soot from his brow. Sometimes the wind learns better manners. Behind them, Harker's hens called out faintly, alive. The old man coughed, eyes wet. "You saved more than birds, son." Amos tipped his hat, silent, but the katat quiet didn't last. Down the hill, through the thinning smoke, they saw Riker's horse circling back. Ryder hunched low and angry. He had a pistol drawn this time. Amos's jaw tightened. "Get him inside," he told Ada, nodding toward Harker. She hesitated only a second before obeying. Nate rose beside Amos, face pale, breath ragged. "He's coming," the boy said. Amos didn't move. He planted his shovel upright in the dirt, the metal edge glowing faint in the firelight. His voice, when it came, was low and calm. "Let him." The wind sighed once more through the grass, carrying the echo of hooves. Riker was coming up the ridge, and the prairie held its breath. Riker rode hard up the ridge, the pistol shaking in his hand. The glow from the dying fire lit him from behind, a red halo of rage. Amos stood waiting, shovel in hand, boots planted wide, the kind of stillness that dares a man to move first. Nate stepped forward half a pace, but Amos's voice stopped him. "Not your fight, son." The wind had gone quiet again. Too quiet. Ada watched from the porch where she'd helped Harker in sit, her hands gripping the doorframe. The smell of smoke clung to her hair. The light on her face flickered between fear and fury. Riker pulled up his horse a few yards away. "You've got a strange way of dying, Gray," he said. "Saving people who ain't worth saving." Amos tilted his head. "Strange thing about fire," he said. "It shows what a man's made of." Riker sneered. "That right? Then you'll burn honest." He raised the gun. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Wind, dust, the whimper of the old man behind the door. Riker squeezed the trigger. The hammer snapped down with a dull click. Nothing. A second time. Click. Riker's face twisted. "Damn it." "Wind's got its own temper," Amos said softly. He took 2 steps forward, shovel still low, not a threat, but a statement. "Go home, Riker." The outlaw snarled, swung the gun like a club. Amos caught the blow with his forearm, pain flashing through his body. He didn't answer with fists. Instead, he drove the shovel's flat edge into the dirt, sending a gust of ash into Riker's eyes. The man shouted, stumbling back, blind. Before Amos could move again, Nate ran past him, tackling Riker to the ground. The gun flew from Riker's hand and clattered near the fence line. The 2 men rolled, fists landing with the sound of desperation. Ada gasped, half-stepping off the porch. "Nate!" Amos barked. The boy froze mid-swing, breathing hard, face streaked, black. Riker spat blood into the dirt, eyes wild. "You think this changes anything? The law don't care what burns." Amos knelt beside him. "Law's one thing," he said. "Decency's another." He pulled the man's hands behind his back and tied them with what was left of the rope Ada had been bound with. "Seems fitting," he murmured. Down the hill, the last of the flames hissed out, leaving only smoke and the faint glow of coals. Ada came forward, still trembling. She looked at Riker, then at Amos. "Is it over?" Amos shook his head. "Fire's done, but this ain't over." He turned toward the horizon, where a faint light was rising, the first gray wash of dawn. "There's paper in his wagon," he said. "Looks like business ledgers." Ada's breath caught. "He mentioned Harker's debt. Said it wasn't paid." Amos nodded. "Let's see how much truth burns off the page." They left Riker bound under Nate's watch and made their way down the slope. The wagon stood near the old fence, one wheel broken, the ground around it scorched. Amos climbed up, pried open a wooden chest, and found a bundle of papers wrapped in oilskin. Ada reached for them, her fingers shaking. "That's Harker's mark," she whispered. "But he can't even write." The papers were signed, stamped, sealed, all for debts that never existed. Amos looked down at the ashes still smoking around their boots. "He forged half the valley into chains," he said quietly, "and used fire to keep them tied." Ada held one page up to the light. The ink shimmered purple. cheap dye from a traveling notary. Mr. Harker never knew, she said. Her voice trembled between rage and disbelief. They made him a villain without him ever raising his hand. Jim 900 psems. Behind them, Nate approached slowly. What'll you do with him? Amos closed the ledger and tucked it under his arm. Take him to town. Let the papers speak. Nate nodded. He won't like that. He don't have to, Amos said. They turned toward the ridge again. Riker sat slumped against the post where Ada had been tied hours before, wrists bound by the same rope. The sun broke the horizon behind him, turning the world to gold and red. For a strange, silent moment, no one spoke. Amos looked out over the field, blackened earth, faint smoke rising like breath from something still alive. It'll grow back, he said softly. Fire don't end things. It changes their shape. Ada followed his gaze. And what about us? He turned to her, eyes soft in the new light. We'll find the shape that fits. Then he looked past her, toward the town waiting in the distance, the papers under his arm heavy as proof. Let's go tell them what really burned tonight. From behind, the wind stirred again, gentle this time, brushing away the last ash on the field. By the time they reached the edge of Painted Mesa, the sun had burned its way through a veil of smoke, turning the sky the color of tarnished brass. The town was just waking. Doors opened, boots scuffed on wood, and the first wagons creaked toward the square. Amos walked at the front, Riker roped behind him, like a shadow of what cruelty leaves behind. Ada carried the bundle of ledgers, her wrists still bandaged, her step steady now. Nate followed, silent, hat low, the kind of boy who'd aged a decade overnight. The townsfolk stared as they passed. The sight of a bound man and a woman streaked with ash drew whispers like sparks. Someone muttered, "That's Harker's girl." Another said, "That's Riker's brand." Amos kept walking. He didn't explain. Some truths didn't need permission to arrive. They stopped in front of the courthouse, a low, square building that still smelled of pine tar and old oaths. Sheriff Conroy stood by the door, cleaning his spectacles, his expression already sour. "Morning, Gray," he said. "What's this mess?" "Justice," Amos answered. He dropped the rope into the dust. Riker swore under his breath. Conroy's eyes flicked from Riker to Ada. "You bring trouble to my steps. I hope you bring proof with it." Ada stepped forward, lifting the bundle of papers. "We brought more than proof," she said, her voice raw but clear. "We brought what he's been selling." She spread the papers across the sheriff's table, the forged debts, the false seals, the names of farmers who'd lost more than land. The ink was still purple, shining wet where the fire hadn't reached. Conroy frowned, leaning close. "These signatures..." "Fake," Amos said. "Every one. You'll find your name on some of them too, if you look long enough." The room went still. Outside, the sound of wind, through the hitching posts, filled the silence. Conroy's hand froze halfway to his holster. "You making accusations, Gray?" Amos met his eyes. Just reading what's written. Behind them, Nate spoke up. His voice shook, but the words didn't. He made us write them. Said nobody'd check so long as we paid our share. We didn't know it'd go this far. He swallowed hard. But we knew enough. Conroy stared at the boy, then at Riker, who sat slumped and smiling, his teeth black with soot. You think you'll win this? Riker rasped. You think one night makes you clean? The law's mine, boy. Bought and branded. Amos's voice came low. Then maybe it's time to change the brand. Ada laid her hand flat on the table. You can't unburn land, Sheriff, she said softly. But you can stop the next match. Her words hung in the air like the moment before rain. Conroy looked from her to the papers again. Something shifting behind his eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe the first crack in a dam. He straightened. I'll see these checked, he said finally. You'll stay in town until I do. Amos nodded. We'll stay. As they stepped back into the street, the sky had lost its smoke. Wind slid through the wheat bales stacked outside the mercantile. Cool now. Clean. Ada turned to Amos. You think he'll do right? Men do what they can live with, Amos said. We gave him something he can't forget. Nate lingered near the hitching post, eyes on the road out of town. What'll happen to him? He asked, nodding toward Riker, who was being led inside. Amos looked at the boy. The prairie remembers every man's heat, he said. It don't need our help keeping score. Ada followed his gaze toward the distant hills where the field had burned black. It's strange, she said softly. I thought I'd never want to see that place again. He nodded. You should. That's where you started breathing again. The church bell rang, low and slow, carrying across the square. The town began to move, as if the noise reminded them it was morning. Somewhere, a dog barked, and a child laughed. Life was already claiming the day back from the night. Ada stood beside Amos, both of them watching the sunlight spread across the dust. What now? She asked. He turned the shovel in his hand, the same one that had saved them. Now we keep it from happening again. And as they walked toward the livery to find fresh horses, neither noticed that the sheriff had stepped out onto the porch, holding one of the forged pages to the light. The purple ink caught the sun like a bruise, and for the first time in years, his hands were shaking. That night, rain finally came. Not the kind that washed everything clean, but the kind that whispered instead of spoke, pattering softly on roofs, making the dust rise like steam. Amos sat under the porch of the boarding house, hat tipped low, eyes following the thin silver lines of water running down the street. The shovel leaned against the rail beside him, its edge dulled and dark. Across the road, the jailhouse window glowed faintly. Riker was inside, pacing like a caged animal, his curses lost in the hum of the rain. Amos could hear them even through the sound of the storm. Men like that never learned to be quiet. He turned his gaze back toward the horizon where the prairie stretched, black and endless, the memory of fire still flickering behind his eyelids. Ada came out from the lamplight behind him, wrapped in a blanket. Her hair was damp, her face soft in the glow from the doorway. "You should rest," she said. "You've been sitting here since sundown." "Can't rest when the ground's still hot," Amos replied. His voice carried that slow drawl that made the words sound older than they were. She stepped closer, following his eyes toward the dark horizon. "You've seen it before, haven't you?" she asked quietly. "That kind of fire." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Not like that one. The last one took my sister." Ada's breath caught. The rain fell harder, as if trying to hide his words. Amos's hands tightened on his knees. "Her name was Ruth. Barn caught in a dry storm up near Salina. We tried to cut a break, but the wind changed. She went back for the horses. Never came out." Ada knelt beside him, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. He nodded, eyes distant. "I used to think the prairie was just cruel, but it ain't. It's careless. Same as men who think they own it." The street shimmered with reflections. From somewhere far off, a dog barked once, and fell silent. The world smelled of wet dust and smoke that refused to die. Ada reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, folded scrap, one of the forged pages she had taken from the courthouse before it was sealed away. "I kept this," she said, "to remind me what lies look like on paper." Amos took it from her, his rough fingers brushing hers. "And what truth costs," he said. "Sometimes both burn the same." Inside the boarding house, the lamp flickered and went out, leaving only the orange glow of a dying coal in the stove. Nate's voice came faintly from the back room. He was reading aloud to Harker, helping the old man sign a statement for the sheriff. The words were slow, halting, but honest. "Boy's got a steadier hand than he knows," Amos murmured. Ada smiled faintly. "You gave him something to hold on to." "Maybe," Amos said. "Or maybe he just stopped letting Riker hold it for him." The rain thinned, turning into mist. The smell of sage drifted in from the plains. Ada sat back on her heels, studying the man beside her. His coat was soaked through, his shoulders drawn with quiet strength, his eyes fixed on the distance like someone who still listened for ghosts. She wanted to say something about fear, or gratitude, or the strange peace that came after surviving. But the words didn't form. Instead, she said, "When the fire turned, it didn't feel like luck. It felt like choice." Amos looked at her then, really looked. "Maybe it was," he said. "Maybe the wind just waited for someone to stop running from it." Thunder rolled once, far away, soft as memory. Ada shivered, and Amos lifted his coat, draping it over her shoulders. His hand brushed her arm, warm despite the chill. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When dawn finally came, the rain stopped as quietly as it had begun. The air smelled clean, but the ground was marked. Black scars winding through gold, Ada stood, looking toward the east, where the first light touched the roof of the courthouse. "He'll hang for it, won't he?" she asked. Amos rose beside her. "Law will do what law does," he said. "I'm more worried about what the land remembers." She turned to him. "And you?" He adjusted his hat, eyes steady. "I remember Ruth, but I remember you now, too. That's enough." Behind them, a new sun crawled over the town, glinting off puddles and broken glass. The prairie stretched out again, waiting, quiet, patient, forgiving in its own hard way. Amos watched it a moment longer, then said, almost to himself, "Let's see what grows from what's left." Ada smiled, her eyes bright in the pale light. "Maybe something good." He nodded. "Maybe something worth keeping." And somewhere beyond the ridge, a meadowlark began to sing, soft, uncertain, but alive. By midday, the town had gathered in the square, the air still damp from last night's rain. The boards of the courthouse porch creaked under the weight of boots and expectation. Harker sat in a chair near the front, a blanket over his legs, eyes red but clear. Beside him, Ada stood straight, the bandages on her wrists clean now, her chin lifted. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff Conroy came out with a folded paper in his hand. His voice carried just enough to reach the edges of the crowd. "By order of the county court, all deeds and debts issued under Tate Riker's name are void. His ledgers are proven false. Property lost to these papers will return to rightful hands." The words fell like hammer blows, heavy and certain. A murmur rolled through the people. First disbelief, then relief, then something close to pride. For the first time in years, the town stood straight. Harker bowed his head. "Never thought I'd see a law do the right thing," he said softly. Ada touched his shoulder. "Maybe it takes the right fire," she whispered. Riker stood between two deputies, wrists chained, face drawn tight with disbelief. He spat in the dust. "You think they'll thank you?" he hissed at Amos. "You made me the villain. Now they'll need another." Amos met his glare, voice quiet but hard. "Then maybe they'll look in the mirror first." The deputies led Riker down the steps. A gust of wind caught the edge of his coat, tossing dust in his wake. And for a second, it felt like the prairie itself was brushing him off. Nate stood nearby, watching, his hands knotted at his sides. "Never thought I'd see him fall," he said. "Men fall easy," Amos replied. "Standing up again. That's the work." The sheriff folded his papers and turned to Amos. "You'll be testifying in the circuit court," he said. "I'll be there," Amos answered. "But I'm done digging for other men's sins. Time to dig for crops instead." Ada smiled faintly at that, her eyes soft. "Then you'll need help. The land's big, and the wind's stubborn." He nodded once, slow. "I can use someone who already knows how to fight both." The crowd began to thin, the sound of voices fading into the hum of afternoon. A horse nickered near the hitching rail. The same bay that had carried Amos into fire now standing calm, tail flicking lazily. Harker's granddaughter, the girl with the blue ribbon, ran to it, holding out an apple. The world felt smaller, safer somehow. Ada turned to look at the black line of burned earth still visible beyond the fields. "You think it'll grow back?" she asked. Amos squinted into the sunlight. "It already is. You just can't see it yet." The church bell tolled once, slow and deep. The sheriff removed his hat. The people paused, then began to go about their business again. Life returning, piece by piece. Amos stepped closer to Ada, voice low. "You've got a place to stay?" She nodded. "Harker says there's work for me. Fields to plant, fences to mend." "That's good work," Amos said. "Honest work." She smiled at him. "So's yours." He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. "Maybe this time, it'll be enough." The wind shifted east, brushing across their faces. Ada looked at him with something between gratitude and understanding. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" He thought for a moment, eyes tracing the horizon. "No. You don't leave a place that finally lets you stand still." She nodded, silent for a long while. Then, almost shyly, she said, "Maybe you could come by the Harker place tomorrow. We'll need another line dug. One that keeps the water in, not the fire out." He met her eyes. "I'll bring the shovel." As she turned to leave, her skirt brushing the dust, the light caught her hair and made it shimmer like the wheat that would grow again. Amos watched until she was halfway down the street, then tipped his hat once, almost to himself. He looked at the courthouse steps, the crowd gone, the world quiet again, and whispered the same words he'd said to Ruth so long ago. "Rest easy now." Then he walked toward the livery, the sound of his boots steady, each step marking the slow return of peace. By late afternoon, the sun had bleached the smoke out of the air. The fields around Painted Mesa shimmered gold again. Only the black ring at the horizon reminding anyone what had happened. The town moved with the quiet rhythm of people trying to remember peace. Children chased each other near the well. The clink of a hammer on horseshoes echoed from the livery. It was as if the place had decided to breathe again. Amos stood by the fence behind the courthouse, sleeves rolled, sharpening the dull edge of his shovel on a stone. The steady rasp of metal was almost like prayer. Nate approached, hat in his hands, eyes lowered. "Sheriff says Riker's being sent to the county jail by sundown," the boy said. "Said he'll be tried in Salina next month." Amos nodded without looking up. "That's the law's work." Nate hesitated. "You think that's enough?" Amos paused his motion, the stone still in his hand. "Sometimes enough is just what keeps us from burning again." They stood in silence a while. A hawk circled high above the plain, riding the wind that once carried fire. Ada came walking from Harker's wagon, her sleeves rolled, dirt on her palms. "We cleared the north rows," she said, smiling faintly. "The soil's dark but soft. It'll take seed again." Nate smiled at her, uncertain but proud. I'll help if you'll have me. Ada nodded. We could use steady hands. The boy looked at Amos, waiting for permission. Amos studied him a long moment, then said, Every man gets to start over once. Don't waste it. They began walking toward the field together, the three of them. The ground was damp from last night's rain, footprints sinking deep. Harker sat nearby, whittling a stick, the blue ribbon tied to his cane fluttering in the breeze. He looked up and said, Seems the land's remembering us. Ada knelt beside him, smiling. Or forgiving us. Same thing, maybe, Harker said, eyes glinting under his hat brim. Amos lifted the shovel, driving it into the earth. The sound of metal biting soil carried across the field, a sound older than sorrow. Ada followed with a hoe, turning over clumps of black dirt. The smell was sweet, alive. Nate fetched a pail from the wagon, scattering handfuls of seed across the furrows. This feels wrong, Nate said after a while. Planting where we fought. Amos leaned on the shovel. Feels right to me. You rebuild where the ground remembers you. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that reached toward the line of burned prairie. The firebreak still marked the boundary, dark earth against gold. Ada looked at it for a long time. It's strange, she murmured. That scar kept us alive. Scars usually do, Amos said quietly. When the last of the seed was spread, Ada stood, brushing dirt from her hands. She looked around at the others, at the quiet of the field, at the slow return of ordinary things. It's not much, she said softly. Amos looked at the dark soil glinting with seed. It's a start. A horse's whinny broke the stillness. Sheriff Conroy rode up from town, his face unreadable. Just came from the telegraph office, he said. Word's spreading. Folks from downriver are talking about rebuilding. You might have started something. Amos gave a small shrug. Fire does that. Conroy looked at him a long moment, then smiled. A weary, honest thing. We'll be needing good men on the county lines this summer. Wind's been strange. Amos nodded. We'll be here. The sheriff turned his horse and Chanta rode back toward town. The three of them watched him go, the sound of hooves fading into the hum of insects and wind. The horizon blazed with evening light. Not fire this time, just sun finding its way home. Ada turned to Amos. When do we stop working? He looked at the shovel in his hand, at the line of furrows glinting in the low light. When the land stops remembering fire, he said, and maybe not even then. She smiled, tired but full of something steady. Then I'll keep planting. He tipped his hat. Then we'll keep digging. Behind them, the young wheat swayed in the wind's first soft promise, and the black line that once meant destruction now looked almost like a border of protection, a mark not of what they'd lost, but what they'd chosen to save. And as the light faded, Ada felt, for the first time in a long while, that standing still could feel like moving forward. The morning broke soft and clean, the kind of light that didn't demand anything from the world. A thin mist clung to the fence posts, and the air smelled faintly of ash and dew, a reminder of what had been and what still could be. Down by the north field, children were gathering with buckets, laughing as they passed water between them. The town had decided to burn again, not in destruction this time, but in care. It was Ada's idea, a controlled burn to strengthen the soil before planting season. Fire isn't always the enemy, she'd told the town council, her voice calm but firm. Sometimes it's the line that saves us. They'd listened, and now half the valley had turned up to watch. Amos stood beside her at the edge of the field, shovel in hand as always. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Ada nodded. "You taught me how to listen to the wind." He smiled, a small, proud thing. "Then let's teach it how to listen back." Sheriff Conroy gave the signal. Nate struck the first match. The flame caught slow, crawling along the dry straw until it found its rhythm, spreading in a careful circle within the trench Amos had cut at dawn. People stood in silence, watching the glow build, reflected in every face: fear, respect, wonder. The fire moved low and steady, humming like a song that everyone somehow knew. Harker sat on a wagon seat, holding the little girl with the blue ribbon on his knee. "That's how you keep land honest," he whispered to her. She nodded, eyes wide, the firelight dancing in them. Ada moved along the line with a wet burlap sack, tamping stray sparks before they could escape. The heat brushed her face, but it didn't feel cruel anymore. "Feels different now," she said. Amos kept his eyes on the flame. "That's 'cause you're standing on the right side of it." The fire finished its circle and settled into a red rim, warm and clean. Smoke lifted straight into the sky, thin and white. No chaos, no screams, just the quiet power of something used right. The townsfolk began to clap, softly at first, then louder, the sound mingling with the crackle of the embers. Nate grinned, wiping soot from his cheeks. "We did it," he said. Amos nodded, eyes reflecting the firelight. "No, you all did. Together." Ada turned to him, smile soft but certain. "You're staying through harvest, then?" He hesitated, looking out across the glowing field. "I was thinking I might," he said finally. "Some fences still need mending." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Some hearts, too." For a long time, neither spoke. The fire's edge glowed behind them, marking a new boundary, not between what had burned and what survived, but between fear and faith. As the last embers dimmed, Amos brushed his hand against hers. Not a promise, not yet, but something close. "Fire keeps you honest," he murmured. Ada met his gaze. "Then I reckon we'll stay honest a while longer." The wind carried their laughter toward the hills, where the grass would soon rise green again from black soil. And though the prairie would burn again someday, everyone who saw that morning would remember how it looked when it didn't destroy, when it cleansed and made way for something new. Evening rolled over painted mesa in slow gold, the kind that turns fences into lines of fire and shadows into something almost holy. The town had gone quiet after the burn. Smoke drifted low and pale over the fields, and the smell of damp ash clung to every sleeve and boot. But it wasn't a sad smell anymore. It was the smell of work done right. Amos walked the fence line west of Harker's property, shovel slung over one shoulder, his stride unhurried. The ground still held warmth from the morning's controlled fire, and he could feel it through the soles of his boots, that steady hum of life waking under soot. Ada followed a few paces behind, carrying a hammer and a small crate of nails. Every few yards she stopped, set a new post, and fastened wire, her movements sure and calm. When they reached the last post, the sun was already touching the far hills. Amos drove the shovel into the dirt, leaning against it. "Fence'll hold," he said. Ada smiled, breathless but content. "Maybe for a while. Wind's got a habit of testing things." "So do people," he replied. A soft laugh escaped her. "Guess we're both still standing." "Guess we are." They stood side by side, watching the light stretch across the valley. The land, once blackened, now glowed faintly copper, a bruised but living thing. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned. Behind them, Nate was leading the last of the horses back from pasture. The animals snorted, restless but safe. Harker sat on his porch, rocking slow, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. The little girl with the blue ribbon played near his boots, humming tunelessly. The town had settled into a kind of peace that didn't come from forgetting, but from learning to carry memory gently. Amos picked up a handful of soil, letting it sift between his fingers. "You ever notice," he said, "how the earth smells different after a burn?" Ada glanced at him. "Like rain and rust," she said, rate, slow. "Like something that remembers pain," he murmured, "but don't resent it." Ada watched his hand, rough and dark against the glowing soil. "That's how you are," she said quietly. He looked at her, eyes catching the last of the light. "How's that?" "You remember pain," she said, "but you don't let it make you cruel." For a long time he didn't answer. Then he said, "Used to be I thought that was weakness. And now? Now I figure it's the only thing that keeps you human." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cedar and the faint, sweet tang of cooling ash. Ada wrapped her shawl tighter. "You'll head west soon?" she asked softly. "Maybe," Amos said. "There's a ranch near Cheyenne that needs a hand come winter." Her eyes fell to the ground. "You always moving on?" He smiled faintly. "Only till the land tells me to stop." Ada looked out toward the horizon, where the fire break curved like a scar turned beautiful by time. "This land's been talking," she said. He turned to her. "And what's it saying?" "That it's tired of losing good men." That drew the first real smile from him in days, slow, warm, and genuine. He looked down at the shovel, then back at her. "You trying to hire me, Miss Delaney?" "I'm trying to keep what's worth keeping," she said. They walked back toward the house, the long grass brushing their boots. The sound of crickets rose with the dark, and the first stars blinked open above the plains. The fire line still glowed faintly behind them, a silver edge in the moonlight. As they reached the porch, Ada stopped and turned. "You ever think maybe the fire didn't come to destroy us," she said, "but to make us stay still long enough to see what mattered?" Amos looked back at the horizon. "Never thought of it that way." "Then maybe it's time you did." Harker lifted his mug in greeting as they approached. "Fence looks good," he called. "It'll hold," Amos answered. "Good," Harker said. "So will we." The little girl ran up, holding a jar with a tiny firefly trapped inside. "It's still lighting up," she said proudly. Ada smiled and opened the lid. "Let it go," she said gently. "If it stays, it forgets how." The girl nodded, and the firefly drifted upward, blinking once before vanishing into the dusk. Amos watched it rise, then spoke softly. "You ever notice how even the smallest light finds its way out?" Ada looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Maybe it's not looking for a way out," she said. "Maybe it's looking for somewhere to belong." He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. They sat on the porch steps. The wood was warm from the day's sun. Amos leaned the shovel against the railing and took off his hat, resting it on his knee. Ada handed him a tin cup of coffee. Their hands brushed, and neither of them pulled away. The air buzzed with the sound of night settling in. A coyote called from far off. The stars thickened above, clear and sharp. For the first time since the fire, Amos didn't feel the weight of something unfinished pressing on his chest. He just felt still. "Tomorrow," Ada said softly, "we'll start planting the east field." He nodded. "I'll be here early." "I know," she said. "You always are." He smiled, sipping the coffee. "Habit of men who've seen things burn." "And rebuild," she added. They sat there until the moon rose high, silvering the fields and the river. When Ada finally stood, she lingered a moment at the door. "Good night, Amos," she said. "Good night, Ada." She paused. "You think you'll ever stop running from fire?" He looked toward the horizon, where the faintest shimmer of ember still glowed. "Not running anymore," he said. "Just learning where to build the brakes." And as she disappeared inside, Amos leaned back in his chair, the night air cool on his face, the sound of the wind whispering through the wheat like a lullaby. Somewhere in that gentle hum, he heard Ruth's voice again. Not in sorrow this time, but in peace, Datung. You kept the line, little brother. He closed his eyes, letting that warmth settle deep. The prairie breathed around him, alive, whole, forgiving. And when dawn came, it found him still there, hat pulled low, a quiet man guarding a field that no longer needed saving, only tending. The first frost of that winter soft as breath, settling on the fences and wheat shoots that had dared to rise again after the fire. Dawn spread over painted mesa in layers, blue, then rose, then the pale gold that made even the scars shimmer. From his porch, Amos Gray watched the frost melt on the fence rails they had set together, drop by drop, as if the earth itself was sighing in relief. The shovel leaned where it always did, blade darkened by years of work, handle worn smooth by his palm. He could have set it aside, maybe hung it above the door like a keepsake. But Amos wasn't the kind of man who turned tools into trophies. Work was its own kind of prayer, and this land was the altar he had been given. Ada Delaney stepped out of the cabin with 2 tin mugs. Her shawl was pulled close, but a lock of auburn hair had escaped, catching the morning light. "You'll freeze out here," she said, her breath clouding. He took the mug, smiling faintly. "I've seen colder mornings." "Not this one," she said, teasing. "This one's ours." They stood side by side, watching sunlight crawl across the black line that had once been their firebreak. It was nearly invisible now, just a darker seam in the gold of the field, a quiet memory of where courage had drawn its boundary. "The ground's ready for spring," Ada murmured. Amos nodded. "It'll hold." Fire burned the weeds deep, gave the roots room to breathe. Her eyes followed his. "And what about people? You think we grow back the same?" He thought a long moment. "No," he said softly. "We grow back honest." Behind them, the sound of Nate's laughter carried across the yard. He was tossing feed to the hens with the little girl, Harker's granddaughter, whose blue ribbon had become a kind of legend in the valley. Every now and then, she'd point toward the horizon where the fire had once been and ask, "That's where we beat it, right?" And Nate, still growing into Chatu, his own man, always answered, "That's where we learned." Amos smiled faintly at the sound. "Boys come a long way." Ada nodded. "You showed him how?" "I just handed him a shovel," he said. "He did the rest." Harker came out then, coat buttoned to his chin, leaning on his cane. The years sat easier on him now. The guilt of Riker's forged debts replaced by the stubborn pride of a man rebuilding something worth keeping. "Coffee smells like mercy," he said, settling into his chair. "And I'll take some if you're offering." Ada handed him the mug. "You've got fields to check before noon." "Old bones can wait on the sun," Harker chuckled. "But I'll tell you this. The soil's turned black in a good way. Ash worked its miracle. You two saved more than this place. You saved the folks that live on it." Amos shook his head. "We just did what had to be done." Harker's gaze softened. "That's the part people forget. Doing what has to be done. And doing it kind." The words hung a moment, weighty as the winter air. Ada turned her face toward the light, and something in her expression changed. Less weariness, more calm. "It's strange, isn't it? I used to think the fire took everything from me, but now I see it gave something back." Amos looked at her. "What's that?" "A reason to stay." They stepped down from the porch, the frost cracking beneath their boots, the field crunching softly beneath them. The world was bare but alive, a season holding its breath before bloom. They walked the ridge where the fire had run wild months before. The wind hummed low, brushing through the blackened grass, now sprouting green at the roots. Ada knelt, tracing her glove over the tender shoots. "Look at that," she whispered. "Didn't think the earth could forgive this fast." "Forgiveness isn't fast," Amos said. "It just starts small enough you don't notice." She looked up at him then, eyes bright. "Like us?" He smiled, just a tug at the corner of his mouth. "Like us." They worked through the morning, mending what the wind had undone. At noon, Ada brought lunch to the fence line. Biscuits, cold beans, a slice of apple from last harvest. Amos ate slow, like a man at peace with quiet. "Never thought a place could feel like home again," he said, half to himself. "It's not the place," Ada said softly. "It's who you build it with." He looked at her, long and steady. Something unspoken passed between them. Not the sudden, fiery kind of love that breaks things open, but the quiet, rooted kind that builds things strong. As they packed up, the wind shifted with a faint smell of smoke. Ada froze. "Is that?" Amos sniffed the air, then shook his head. "Just chimney smoke. From town." She let out a shaky laugh. "I'll never stop hearing it, will I?" "Maybe not," he said gently. "But one day, it'll sound like home instead of danger." Snowflakes began to fall. Lazy, soft, unhurried. Ada lifted her hand, letting one melt on her glove. "Funny thing," she said. "Fire and snow both fall from the sky, and both can take or give life." Amos tilted his hat back, watching the flakes drift down. "Guess it's not what falls that matters. It's who's standing when it does." Evening came early. Lanterns lit warm against the silver plain. Nate returned from town with a parcel, nails, flour, and a new leather strap for Harker's old saddle, rate slow. "Looks like a home," he said. "It is," Ada smiled. After supper, they sat by the fire. Harker told stories of first settlers and narrow mercies. Ada sewed quietly. Amos listened, the rhythm of her needle stitching through cloth, blending with the crackle of flame. When the old man dozed off, Ada looked up. "You'll stay, won't you?" Amos stared into the fire, face caught between shadow and glow. "For a while," he said. "Long enough to see spring through. That's enough." Later, when the fire burned low, Amos stepped outside. The snow had stopped, leaving the world coated in quiet white. He walked to the fence line where the old fire break cut the field, boot prints crunching through thin ice. He stopped where the line met the creek, the moon reflecting off the frozen water. "Ruth, if you can hear me, I did it different this time," he whispered. "Didn't fight the wind. Learned to use it." Ada's step sounded softly in the snow. "Talking to her?" He nodded, not turning. "Always do when it's quiet." She came to stand beside him. "Then tell her something from me." He looked at her, waiting. "Tell her that what she left behind grew into something good." He smiled, eyes bright with unshed tears. She'd like that. They stood a long while, watching moonlight glide across the frost, the kind of stillness that only follows storms, not empty, but complete. When they turned toward the house, Ada slipped her hand into his. It wasn't dramatic or shy. It felt like it had been waiting there all along. His grip tightened, gentle. The porch light glowed ahead, a single lamp against the cold. Inside, the fire was low but steady, the kind that didn't need tending anymore, because it knew how to keep itself. Amos hung his hat on the wall, setting the shovel beside the door. Ada set her shawl on the hook next to his coat. When he turned, she was smiling. That small, unguarded smile from the night the flames broke and the world stopped ending. "Do you ever miss the road?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore." "Why not?" He looked around the cabin. The lantern, the worn table, the soft hum of wind through the cracks. Then back to her. "Because I finally know what staying feels like." Outside, snow began again, slow and forgiving. The prairie lay still beneath it, holding the memory of fire deep in its soil. But this time, it wasn't something to fear. It was warmth folded inside cold, a quiet balance the world had finally learned. And as the night deepened, the only sound was the soft sigh of the wind, carrying a message across the fields, not of destruction, but of endurance. The fire had done its work. It had taken, it had tested, and now it had taught. And in that small house at the edge of the plain, two hearts beat steady beside an ember that would never again need to prove itself by burning. When the fire faded and the land found peace, something deeper took root. Quiet strength, steady love, and the grace of new beginnings. Maybe that's what these old Western tales have always been about. How we weather the storms, how we hold each other upright when the wind blows hardest, and how we keep the light burning, even when all we have left is a handful of ash and faith. If this story brought you warmth, reminded you of simpler times, or stirred a memory of someone who stood beside you through a hard season, share it. Tell us what the frontier means to you in the comments. Your stories matter here. Each like, each subscription, each kind word helps this little circle of hearts keep growing. So tap like, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next tale from Western Tales. Stories of courage, kindness, and the quiet love that still lives in the dust and wind of the Old West. Until next time, friends, may your coffee stay hot, your fences hold strong, and your heart always find its way home.